This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review. I'm your host, Gilad Halpern. Every week we bring you conversations with authors about the books and research and other things that we like. And if you like us, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter by going to our homepage, that's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review. Scroll down to the bottom and click the big red button that says Patreon, click and support us. Some of you have been doing this for months and years, and we cannot thank you enough. This episode is produced in partnership with the Jacob Robinson Institute for the History of Individual and Collective Rights at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. My guest today is a historian of modern Europe at the Hebrew University and the deputy director of the Robinson Institute. Incorporating legal history and political theory, her research focuses on questions of expulsion, restitution, and compensation. Dr. Iris Nachum, hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Thank you, Gilad, for having me.
Your work deals with uprooted populations and compensation, particularly in three cases: the ethnic Germans that were expelled from Eastern Europe following Germany's defeat in the Second World War, the Jewish Holocaust survivors, and the Palestinians refugees of the Nakba. Now, even though you don't link the circumstances of these three cases, and that's an important point to make, you draw parallels between the restitution mechanisms that were developed around them. Now, this is a rather bold suggestion, and as you told me before, and as you write in your papers, all of it has to do with Jacob Robinson's personality. How is he connected to all this?
Right. So let me first introduce Jacob Robinson, who was a leading human rights activist and minority rights activist in the interwar period. He is an intriguing historical figure who was only recently discovered by research. So Jacob Robinson was born in Lithuania to a Jewish family in 1889. He was raised in a multicultural and multilingual environment where people spoke Lithuanian, Hebrew, Yiddish, Polish, Russian, etc. And Jacob Robinson was familiar with these languages. He also knew German, and he spoke Hebrew. So he was familiar with several languages and culture, which shaped his understanding of minority politics. From 1910 to 1914, he studied law at the University of Warsaw. And then from 1923 on, he was a member of the Lithuanian parliament, where he represented the Jewish minority. And in fact, very quickly, he became leader of the minority bloc in the Lithuanian parliament, representing not only the Jewish minority of Lithuania, but also the German, the Russian, and the Belarusian minorities. In addition, from 1925 on until 1933, Robinson was a member of the Congress of European Nationalities, which was an NGO in the interwar period advocating for minority rights in Central and Eastern Europe. Robinson collaborated with the leaders of the German minorities, and he was heavily disappointed by these leaders because already in the early 1930s, they showed sympathies for Nazism. And in fact, for this reason, Robinson left in 1933 the Congress of European Nationalities. In addition, in 1940, Robinson fled Europe. He moved to New York, where he founded the Institute for Jewish Affairs. And at the Institute, together with his brother Nehemiah, he developed plans for post-war compensation and restitution for victims of the Nazi regime.
So that was a watershed, really, because minority rights up until the Second World War was really about taking care of these minorities in the lands where they were a minority, right?
Absolutely.
And following the onset of the Second World War, and this is where Robinson comes in, it shifted to looking at population movements and how to minimize the damage by compensation.
Absolutely. And Robinson, together with his brother Nehemiah, were the first who developed plans for compensation and restitution. And in the second part of the 20th century, and Robinson died in 1977 at the age of 88 in New York. So in the second part of the 20th century, Robinson was present at several situations in which important, crucial legal decisions were made concerning minority rights, human rights, and also compensation. For instance, in 1945, he played a key role in drafting the United Nations Refugee Convention. And in addition, a year later, he co-drafted the compensation agreement between West Germany and Israel. In fact, he was one of the negotiators who demanded compensation from West Germany for the Holocaust.
So he was really the played a leading role behind what was later called the reparation agreement, the Shilumim.
Absolutely.
Between West Germany and Israel. Yeah. And the same legal logic played in all these cases. What was really his perception of refugees, their rights, and how they should be compensated?
So just let me briefly mention the case of the ethnic German expellees. Those were ethnic Germans who were expelled from Eastern and Central Europe after the end of the Second World War. 8 million of them came to Western Germany. And in 1952, West Germany passed a law called the Equalization of Burdens Law. And the intention of this law was to compensate ethnic German expellees for the property they had to leave behind in Central and Eastern Europe before arriving to Western Germany. And the main aim of the Equalization of Burdens Law was to integrate these expellees into Western Germany. And what we do see is a very similar dynamics in the Israeli-German case. What do I mean by that? Well, West Germany paid compensation to Israel, by the way, not for the Holocaust, but for integrating Holocaust survivors into Israel. So West Germany, in fact, paid the integration cost that Israel had for integrating 500,000 Holocaust survivors into the Jewish state, into the Israeli society.
So it was predominantly an economic principle, like integrating, meaning giving them a chance to build themselves as players in the greater society and greater economy?
The compensation given by West Germany to Israel was not dedicated to individual Holocaust survivors, but to the state of Israel. And indeed, the compensations paid by West Germany, these were basically goods and services sent to Israel, rescued the Israeli economy from bankruptcy. So it was an economic gesture supporting the state of Israel and not the individual Holocaust survivor. West Germany also signed a compensation agreement with the Claims Conference, which represented individual Holocaust survivors.
Outside of Israel?
Outside of Israel, right.
Mm-hmm. And the compensation of the expellees, was it also collective or individual?
The compensation for the expellees was individual.
Mm-hmm. And how did the two play out? When it's an individual agreement, so every individual has the right to make a claim to a certain fund and get money out of it. And when it's collective, really the individuals are not party to the agreement at all. So it's basically between the two governments.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I want to turn now to the case of the Palestinian refugees. I mean, it's all around the same time, more or less, right? The late 1940s. And as we know, during the Israel's War of Independence, there were hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs that were either fled or made to leave the country and settled in areas surrounding the new state of Israel. And that was one of the key contentions in the Israeli-Arab conflict and in Israel's diplomatic situation more broadly. And there was a suggestion, at least, it was never materialized, but a proposal for also a restitution, a compensation mechanism for Palestinian refugees, in which Robinson also played a role.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because Moshe Sharett, who was the first Israeli foreign minister, he signed in 1952 the compensation agreement with West Germany. But in 1951, he came up with the idea of compensating Palestinians for the land they had to leave behind, advocating for collective compensation. And he demanded Jacob Robinson, who was then a legal expert for the Israeli mission at the United Nations in New York, to draw a legal opinion on the possibilities of giving compensation to the Palestinians. And Robinson, in this legal paper dated 1951, he supported the idea of giving the Palestinians collective compensation for abandoned land.
To whom?
Yeah, that
They didn't have a government.
They had no government. Yeah, so that was one of the reasons why the idea failed at the end of the day, because the Israeli government, which accepted the idea of principally accepted the idea of paying compensation to Palestinians at the end of the day, well, understood that there is no mechanism that can receive.
But even before that, why did they agree to it? I mean, it seems so contrary to the diplomatic line that they have been pushing since.
Compensation has always to do with moral as well as with political considerations. So on the one hand, we do clearly see a moral consideration. Robinson, as well as Moshe Sharett, were well aware of the horrible situation of the Palestinian refugees. They spoke of the daily deterioration of the physical and psychological and economic situation of the Palestinians.
But also offering compensation is claiming responsibility in a way.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So they claimed responsibility for the expulsion.
I wouldn't say that they claimed responsibility for the expulsion, but they were aware of the moral implication. On the one hand. On the other hand, compensation has always to do with political interests. And Robinson, as well as Sharett, thought that by giving compensation will help the Palestinians integrate into Arab countries, into neighboring Arab countries. So the idea was giving compensation in order to support the integration of Palestinians into Arab societies.
Well, was it really a serious proposal?
Yes, it was.
Because the Israeli economy at the time was in tatters.
Yeah.
I mean, Israel was incredibly poor. I mean, also West Germany came out of the Second World War pretty badly hurt economically, but there was, of course, international aid and a strong economic infrastructure that helped it bounce back pretty quickly. But where would this, in the Israeli case, to the Palestinians, where did they think this money would come from?
From the Americans. And the Americans agreed to pay.
So why wasn't it materialized in the end? Because there was no one to, no interlocutor?
Right, and also because the Israelis offered collective compensation, whereas the Arab leaders demanded individual compensation. And also Israel only offered compensation for abandoned land, whereas Arab leaders demanded compensation for everything lost, just not just land, but household goods and other real estate.
How was it integrated into the aftermath of the UN Resolution 194 that recognized the right of return of Palestinian refugees? I mean, how did Israel react to it, and what in this matrix led the Arab leaders to their response to it?
So the UN resolution has two aspects, two parts. One part is speaking about the return of the Palestinians, and the other part is speaking of the compensation. So Robinson and Sharett's idea was to pay compensation, but refrain from taking Palestinians back. And this brings me back to the equalization of burdens law that I mentioned before. So the equalization...
In Germany?
Right, in Germany in 1952. So the idea of the equalization of burdens law was basically the same. We are paying compensation for lost property in order to integrate refugees and expellees into the society. And this was the same case with West Germany paying money to Israel. Namely, the aim was to integrate Holocaust survivors into the state of Israel. The idea was not of taking back the Jews to Europe. And the same case we do have with the Palestinians. So the idea is to pay compensation to the Palestinian refugees, but not taking them back.
So in a way, these two parts of the Resolution 194 are contradictory. Right? One says, take them back, and the other says, you don't have to take them back.
No, the resolution says both. Take them back and pay compensation.
But then the way Robinson and Charette interpreted it, saying that pay compensation actually makes the first part redundant.
I mean, they didn't say it explicitly, but if we look at the dynamics of the equalization of burdens law, if we look at the dynamics of the agreement signed between West Germany and Israel, we do see similar dynamics.
Well, what was the convention when it comes to international law among international legal experts and international governments, predominantly the American one, to this really brilliant idea that they came up with?
The right to compensation is a right that only developed recently. So back then there was no right to compensation. Yeah, no one could claim a right to compensation. So basically, when Germany paid money, it was voluntarily. And also Israel's offer, basically, at the end of the day, was a voluntary offer.
But what was how did the American government, who was supposed to bankroll everything, react to it?
The American government was highly interested in having Israel paying compensation to the Palestinian refugees.
So they were in favor of that principle that guided Robinson and Charette.
Absolutely.
Why was Robinson forgotten? I mean, you said earlier when you introduced him that only recently he was discovered by research. And of course, there's an institute at the Hebrew University that is dedicated, I wouldn't say almost entirely, but in large part to his enterprise and his legacy. In which archive was he hiding all this time? I mean, metaphorically, but why wasn't he more central in the way Israelis perceive their own history?
First of all, a lot of Jewish lawyers, international lawyers, were forgotten and only rediscovered recently. Where was he hidden? In many, many archives around the globe, from Israel to the United States, Germany, Eastern Europe, etc. He left a tremendous amount of papers. Why was he forgotten in Israel? That's a very interesting question. By the way, there's no name, no street on his name in Israel, which is also very interesting. Why was he forgotten? Well, maybe because he was not an Israeli citizen. This is an interesting point because he advocated, to a large extent, Zionist politics, but never moved to Israel, never got the Israeli citizenship. Why do I'm emphasizing that? Because he represented Israel at the United Nations. He was the legal advisor to the Israeli mission at the UN for several years, without being an Israeli citizen.
And he never wanted to?
I don't know.
You never asked him. But also, what is his legacy, not just for the Israel's diplomatic history, but also for, you said that it was really central in several legal intersections in the immediate post-war era. That was really when international law came into being. I mean, among international law scholars and practitioners, does his memory still loom large?
Yeah. Especially when it comes to Robinson's involvement in the Refugee Convention which was drafted in 1951, and he played a key role in drafting this convention. So, he's seen today as one of the leading legal scholars who shaped international law, who shaped international criminal law. For instance, he was an advisor to the American prosecution at the Nuremberg trials. In addition, Robinson was an advisor to the Israeli Attorney General at the Eichmann trial. So the trial in Israel held against Adolf Eichmann, who was one of the leading perpetrators of the Holocaust. So Robinson was not only involved in compensation and advocated for minority rights, but he had also a very practical impact on these trials.
Yeah, so it was really, so that makes him a public figure in a way that makes his disappearance from collective memory all the more surprising.
Yeah.
I mean, as someone who studied him, of course, you said he's left many papers in many archives around the world. But what about his public figure? Was he, I wouldn't say a household name, but someone who was known in Israel at the time, or maybe for people who follow the Nuremberg trials, for people who follow the Eichmann trial? I mean, was he one of the personalities that were the so-called stars?
Absolutely. He was known among the legal experts. He was also known among Holocaust scholars because he was one of the first, he called himself a historian. Yeah, he was one of the first historians who collected material documents on the persecution of the Jews in Nazi-occupied countries.
Yeah. And his work and legacy justify a large number of scholars working at the Robinson Institute in the Hebrew University. Many of them will be guests in this series of podcasts that we're kicking off today. Do you want to say something about how your colleagues at the Institute, the researchers there, the doctoral, postdoctoral researchers, how their work ties into Robinson's legacy?
Yes, thank you, Gilad, for asking. The Institute was founded in 2020 at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. The Institute is financially supported by the Alfred Landecker Foundation, which is based in Berlin. And the Institute is headed by Professor Dan Diener. And as you said, our research at the Institute is heavily influenced by Jacob Robinson's life and work. So at the Institute, we are working in an interdisciplinary way, which means that we are drawing from law, international relations, philosophy, and history. And our main topics at the Institute are, of course, compensation and restitution for Jewish and non-Jewish victims of grave human rights abuses. But we are also dealing with expulsion, ethnic cleansing, and humanitarianism. And one of our main topics is of national autonomy, collective rights, collective national rights, and their connection to individual human rights.
Mm-hmm.
So each of our researchers is focusing on a specific aspect. Jacob Robinson is influencing our research at the Institute and the topics we are dealing with.
Dr. Iris Nachum, the Jacob Robinson Institute for the History of Individual and Collective Rights at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Gilad.
And many thanks to Itai Shelem, the manager of TLV1 Studios, and to the Robinson Institute for their generous support for this series. And now we've got a request, because most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcasts app, and we would like to ask you to please consider writing us a review. Good, bad, ugly, up to you. You too can support us by going to our website and subscribing onto a Patreon campaign. Check out our archive. It has probably close or maybe more than 1,000 interviews by now. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and most important, join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, from us here in Tel Aviv, goodbye.